Dialogue with a Doctor, featuring Southwest Florida's leading physicians.
Welcome to Dialogue with a Doctor. We're here with Dr. Raymond Phillips, a practicing gastroenterologist in Naples, and we've had him on the show before, and we welcome him back because he's a wealth of information. Welcome back, Dr.
Well, thanks,
Phillips.
Rick. Thanks for having me back. Yeah.
Dr. Phillips is going to tell us about himself first, so you know who he is.
Yeah. Well, Greg, I'm a board-certified gastroenterologist, and what that means is I went to college. In my case, I went to Princeton University, graduated there. Went on to medical school at Washington University in St. Louis, and then I did my internal medicine training at Jefferson Hospital for 3 years, and then I was chief resident for 4th year. And because I went through college on an Army ROTC scholarship, I went on active duty in the Army and was assigned to Fort Leonard Wood for 2 years, Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri for 2 years as an internist. And then I was selected for gastroenterology training at Walter Reed, and I was there for 2 years. And then I was on staff at Walter Reed for 2 years after that, doing research and medical care. And so typically a board-certified gastroenterologist goes for this sequence and then takes the certification examination. But after getting out of the Army, I came down here and been practicing ever since. And I practice with Dr. Susan Libersky, Dr. Michael Marks, Dr. Gustavo Rivera. And we have offices in Bonita as well as Marco and Marco Island, as well as in downtown Naples in Colonial Square. So so we're trying to meet all the needs of Collier County and South Lee County as far as gastrointestinal issues.
Well, we will be talking about tonight stool transplants, which is a very alien concept to most people. So we want to know about stool transplants.
Well, sure. Stool transplantation is a very, very new innovation in medicine, and it's been looked at seriously now in the last 4 to 5 years. In our previous show, we had talked about the microbiome as being, and to briefly review, it represents a bacterial population within the colon that generally is beneficial to you, providing nutritional source, protecting you, and then actually as well, providing certain vitamins, and now we're learning that it may actually influence your overall health in terms of preventing or potentially causing certain diseases. And alterations in the microbiome have been now associated with a number of different medical conditions that are very, very widespread, but inflammatory bowel disease such as Crohn's or ulcerative colitis, irritable bowel syndrome, also been associated with a metabolic syndrome, which you see in diabetes and obesity. It's also alterations in the microbiome has been now associated with coronary artery disease and neurological conditions such as Parkinson's and autism. So the connection between these widely different diseases is exciting, because now, if indeed it can be related to the microbiome or an alteration in the microbiome, it provides us now an opportunity to be able to potentially prevent some of the largest epidemics in the United States right now. In particular, I'm talking about diabetes or obesity, but we talk about the epidemic of Clostridia difficile infection across the United States, and that certainly has, the stool transplantation has been used for that in terms of preventing recurrent Clostridia difficile infection, and has been very successful for preventing recurrent Clostridia difficile infection with about a 90% effectiveness for that purpose of prevention. And so it's clear that a stool transplantation can be beneficial in that context, but the thought now has been that, well, maybe it can be useful in these other conditions. And so a lot of research now is looking at that intervention, and so, but in history, nothing's new under the sun. The first stool transplant was done in early China in the 300 AD, and it was typically used as a way of treating people who had severe gastrointestinal illnesses that were not recovering. But in the modern era, it first occurred in the late 1950s on a surgical ward in a northeastern hospital where individuals with C. difficile were infected, and stool transplant cured them. And then over the years, there have been case series and so forth, but most of the research now on this has been done in the last 5 years, looking in particular at recurrent Clostridia difficile. The research was accelerating to such a degree that the Food and Drug Administration in 2013 ruled that stool was a drug, that it was a biologic agent and it needed to be regulated as a drug, and that henceforth, if any research was going to be done on that area for medical intervention, an investigational new drug application had to be granted by the FDA. Now, when that was when the FDA made that ruling in 2013, there was a great deal of public comment, particularly from the gastroenterology community, pointing out that it appeared to be 90%, 95% effective for preventing Clostridia difficile. So the FDA modified that ruling, saying that in the context of this condition, that a stool transplantation could be done, but under certain restrictions. One, the recipient had to know it was an experimental procedure. Two, the donor had to be screened in some fashion to make sure no infection was being transmitted to the recipient. And so those are and then an effort had to be made to follow the recipient to see what kind of benefit they were receiving. So the notion was in that context, the FDA has allowed stool transplantation to proceed on for this ongoing medical issue of Clostridia difficile, but now attention's being turned to these other medical conditions. And 2 years ago, there was a report in gastroenterology looking now at the issue of metabolic syndrome, diabetes, and obesity. To give you an idea of what can be done, stool was transplanted from a lean individuals, lean men, to a group of heavy individuals. And what was noticed in the ensuing 6 weeks, their blood sugars improved, their weight diminished, and their insulin sensitivity increased. That is to say, their insulin resistance diminished and their insulin sensitivity increased, showing that this transplantation actually had caused a metabolic change in these individuals. So it's been and now there's more and more research looking at that, but in terms of diabetes and control of obesity as well.
Well, that's pretty amazing stuff. We're going to take a short break, and we're going to come back after just a few minutes to talk more about stool transplantation. Stool transplantation. Be back in a minute.
Thinking of buying a home located in a golf course community in the Naples, Marco, Bonita, or Estero, Florida? Here is what Mark Lai, former PGA winner, says about Realtor Michael York of the York Real Estate Group of Downing Fry Realty.
Hi, I'm Mark Lai. If you have any real estate needs in Naples, Florida, the one company to contact is the York Real Estate Group. Also, if you want a golf course property to invest in, Michael York of the York Real Estate Group is the guy to contact. Michael knows every golf course in Naples. I will tell you this, he's been in the golf business for a long time. He's played all the great golf courses down here, and he is an outstanding realtor. I've known him for quite some time, and he's he's got a lot of integrity, and he very much knows his stuff on all the different clubs here in Naples. So the York Real Estate Group is a great place to start. So if you have any time or anybody that wants to visit down here in Naples and look at the options out there, please contact the York Real Estate Group.
Welcome back to Dialogue with the Doctor. We're here with Dr. Raymond Phillips, and we're talking about stool transplantation, which seems to be a hot research area. There's a lot to it that we don't know about, and we're learning some of that tonight.
Well, now, the one point I wanted to dwell on is that, as we talked about before, you can have alterations in bacterial population in a number of different conditions. The connection that's been very difficult for people or scientists to make is that, well, gee, how does that alteration lead to disease? How does an alteration in bacterial population, for example, lead to potentially neurological illness, or how does it lead to an alteration that might cause obesity, or how does it lead to inflammatory bowel disease. In the context of inflammatory bowel disease, what happens, and this is increasingly believed in a number of other conditions, is you have this gut epithelium, that is to say the lining of the GI tract, and if you have an alteration in the normal bacterial population, that normal epithelium, that normal gut barrier can be compromised. Bacteria can then make their way into across this barrier and evoke an immune response that can occur locally, as it does in inflammatory bowel disease, or those immune cells that are then elicited can then circulate and go to different parts of the body and cause immune reactions elsewhere in the body. So inflammatory bowel disease, you'll often get issues like arthritis or skin conditions, oral ulcers, visual problems, but it's thought that, well, perhaps this is the case in other conditions like neurological conditions like Parkinson's or autism, is that you might get immune activated cells activated within the GI tract and then going to the brain and causing some inflammation in that area. Alternatively, as we said before, this microbiota is a population of bacteria that are essentially represent an ecosystem, and different ecosystems produce different things. And some of those products might be interacting, for example, these short chain fatty acids can potentially modulate your sense of satiety or modulate issues in terms of circadian rhythm and how your body actually regulates a day-night schedule. So the potential, and this, it's a very, very difficult thing to wrap your brain around, that, hey, that the microbiota might be influencing how your body functions at different times of day and night, and enhancing your metabolic function as a result. So it's a complex system I'm trying to describe to you, and that's why the FDA sort of made this ruling indicating that the stool was a drug and needed to be investigated systematically. So what can an individual do on, as we said before, people like to be empowered, they like to take charge of their health, and there's what we're not interested in is people sort of taking this exciting science and then trying to not wait for the science to sort of meet up with their expectations or perceptions, and not to try to rush out and do stool transplantations on their own, because there's hazards with this. You can transmit infections or other illnesses, bacterial infections, viral infections, and it's even the potential of transmitting other illnesses. There was a recent report of an individual who received a stool transplantation for a recurrent C. diff infection. This is a lean person. They received a stool transplant from their heavy uncle, who was very healthy. The lean person gained 50 pounds in the next 3 months, and she was pretty unhappy about that.
I guess so.
Wow. So you can actually potentially change your metabolism and change your health depending on the origin for that stool transplant. So that's the area of concern. And so what can you do as an individual? Well, as it turns out, there's a lot you can do. Eating a well-balanced diet, emphasizing fruit and vegetables, that tends to promote certain bacteria within your system that generate beneficial metabolites, like these short-chain fatty acids we talked about on another show. So as it turns out, your mother was right, but the volume of this fruit and vegetables is substantial. We're talking like 5 or 7 servings a day, and there's been some recent interest and report from the World Health Organization suggesting that perhaps large amounts of processed meat or red meat might be potentially not beneficial. Those were epidemiological studies, and all those suggest to. I think a more positive way to view things is, hey, let's let's eat more fruit and vegetables, let's eat a well-balanced diet, and not concentrate on negative aspects of the diet itself. And because it's hard to eat the kind of volume of food that's being recommended, where not only you're eating an adequate amount of fiber, but getting the variety of fruit and vegetables you need to. I should say, just as a digression, there's a great emphasis on eating organic food or very fresh food. Well, as it turns out, canned fruit and vegetables have almost the same nutritional content as fresh fruit and vegetables that are organically grown. So if you can't afford something, you don't have to feel like you're being left out. You know, canned fruit and vegetables, frozen fruit and vegetables are perfectly satisfactory from a nutritional standpoint. And someone shouldn't feel like that they have to have those particular items, particularly since there's been a great emphasis on those items in the news press, or media and the various sources. But from a nutritional science standpoint, there's no real difference as far as your GI tract's concerned. They're all beneficial. So it's important to get a well-balanced diet, sufficient volume of fruit and vegetables, a sufficient variety on a regular basis, and minimizing the amount of meat in the diet and minimizing the amount of saturated fat is worthwhile. Those things actually have shown within a very short period of time, within just a day or two, can have a favorable influence on the microbiota within your GI tract. So those simple things can make a big difference and can, as a result, lead to production of certain metabolites that can then in turn favorably influence your health. Now the details how that occurs, well, that's ongoing right now as research is looking at that. But these are things that an individual can do right now at this point, rather than going out and purchasing expensive probiotics or other items. This is something an individual can do. And it makes their life and diet more interesting by getting a variety of different foods in.
I was once told that ancient man daily bowel movement length was 24 inches because we were grazers and we had all this throughput coming through. Is that what we're supposed to do?
Well, now you're talking about the Paleolithic diet, the caveman diet. And there was a time when we were hunter-gatherers and so forth, mainly gatherers. The hunters were not always successful each day, so they relied very much on the gatherers, which is the principal source of nutrition. And that the gatherers were the ones who get berries and nuts and roots and vegetables and so forth. And that nutritional source made up a large component of the diet each day. Now you might say, how in the heck could they know that stuff? Well, there's an archaeological field where they actually investigate the fossils of poo that's found in these sites. And so you can actually do DNA analysis of fossilized stool, and you can determine the different foods that were eaten at the time. So we have a very clear idea what foods were prevalent at the time. Now, yes, indeed, you can have a prodigious amount of bacteria that can accumulate as a result of eating a diet that's high in fruit and vegetables, which is a hunter-gatherer diet. And yes, and the principal component of stool is bacteria. So yeah, you can have a very large movements that can occur as a consequence. But there's nothing wrong with that, and it allows. And so there's nothing unusual about that. Now the question though comes up though: does that diet have to be duplicated in modern man? Will it make you healthier to eat that kind of diet? And you need to investigate that kind of diet because it involves very, very few carbohydrates, and except those in terms of fruit and berries and so forth. And it's a kind of difficult diet to consume because there's very, very little fat in it. And so it's not one that we would necessarily recommend on an ongoing basis. And yes, indeed, the argument has been made that this is the diet your body has adjusted to, or your evolution is evaluated. But your GI tract is pretty flexible. It can accommodate many, many different types of food. And so it's
as you said, a couple of days of eating a certain way can change the bacterial content. So the notion that we should eat like our ancestors may or may not be valid or helpful, but we're going to take a short break. We'll come back and talk more in a minute.
Thinking of buying or selling a home in Naples, Marco, Bonita, or Estero, Florida? Think of the most experienced York Real Estate Group associated with the #1 brokerage in Naples, Downing Fry Realty, which produced $1.9 billion in sales in 2014, controlling 43% of all transactions in Naples. Jim, Michael, and Morgan York make up the York Real Estate Group of Downing Fry Realty. With over $250 million in sales transactions, they can offer you the expertise and trust you want and need in a realtor. Call them today at 239-273-6727 or visit their website, www.naplesyorkrealestate.com.
Welcome back to Dialogue with the Doctor. We're here with Dr. Raymond Phillips, a practicing gastroenterologist in Naples, and we're talking about stool transplants and nutrition and a whole lot of information.
Well, yeah, and this is an area that you'll see more and more in the press about this, and and some commercial endeavors as well. MIT developed a nonprofit called the Open Microbiome, which is it's equivalent to a blood banking organization, but it banks stool. And they do this to provide specimens for research as well as for transplantation in the event of a Clostridia difficile infection for various physicians across the United States. But realistically, it's a labor-intensive effort. The donors have to be screened intensively. This screening process is a very expensive process. It's not screening of donors is very expensive. So that's why we don't really necessarily encourage that within families, because individuals who volunteered as donors for a transplant, who want to volunteer as a donor, they're typically healthy. And to do several $1,000s worth of tests on them, making sure they're not carrying some infection or some illness, insurance typically will not cover that. And so that's why we've been turning to these stool banks as a preferred source, as a way of being able to get transplant material that's already been screened and is known to be safe. But clearly, this is a logistically difficult, and so the research now is looking for a standard collection of bacteria that can duplicate the normal ecosystem of a stool transplant. But the notion right now is really saying, hey, is there any value in terms of doing that for any medical conditions? And it's such an intensely difficult area to study, because when you're talking about large numbers of bacteria in different species, if you're using, you need a standardized transplant to be able to do research on it, because if every donor is different, then it's very, very difficult to really make a prediction about treating a particular condition.
You were saying 100 to 500 species per person, but each person has, in addition, other species?
No, well, that's correct. Across the world, about 15 to 20,000 different species of bacteria have been identified within the microbiota. But any one particular individual might have the range of 100 to 500 different species of bacteria within them at any moment in time. And that bacterial population, that microbiota, is in balance and influenced by the particular diet that an individual takes on a daily basis. But depending on the part of the world they live in and what they've been exposed to, there can be bacterial populations that are unique to that part of the world. And we were mentioning before that in Japan, there's a certain prevalence of a bacterial species that allows Japanese to be able to fully digest seaweed. That bacterial population can break down seaweed into nutritional components that are beneficial and a caloric source. Most populations of microbiota across the world don't have that particular species.
So that sushi is not getting in me?
Sushi's a protein. It's fish.
Well, I mean, the seaweed,
which it might be wrapped in, is just a garnish.
Seaweed salad.
Yeah, it's just a garnish. It's not really giving you any benefit. Maybe a little taste.
It's depressing. Go ahead.
But as a nutritional source, it's probably not helping you or me that much. But in Japanese, it seems to have some benefit, and that's terrific. But knowing those kind of detail is extraordinarily useful. And for that end, the NIH now has initiated this project called the Microbiome Project, where they're trying to do a complete genetic sequence of the microbiome in a standardized healthy population of adults. So 400 to 500 healthy adults now, their stools are being extracted and they're being examined, and the genes are being sequenced so that we know more or less what a normal population would look like in terms of their genetic sequence. You might say, well, who cares about the genetic sequence? But if you know the genetic sequence that exists, and therefore you can then know which bacteria are present, then you can then predict what metabolic products are being produced, and potentially what those metabolic products, which one may be beneficial or which ones may be having a negative effect. So for example, in the example we're using about Japanese, if we find that there's a particular bacteria and there's a particular gene sequence that leads to the production or capability of digesting seaweed, then that can be beneficial. And similarly, you can identify certain bacteria that would, would influence the metabolism in a favorable way with individuals with diabetes or obesity, and potentially use those species through stool transplantation to then favorably influence a person's health. So it's an exciting area, but it's terribly complex and difficult to really understand. And so in an effort for people not to harm themselves, the FAA really is encouraging people not to take matters into their own hands and rush ahead with a stool transplant. And that's why I just want to reiterate what I was saying before. If you want to do anything most beneficial to your health, eat a well-balanced diet. Do what your mother told you to do. Eat your fruit and vegetables.
So we don't have to rush to Okinawa, where they live the longest, and get their stool and transplant it into ourselves.
No, I don't think that.
It's not that simple.
It's not that simple, and I think there's simpler things you can do close to home without having to make that.
I have a feeling that you're coming back. You have to come back to talk more about this, because even in 6 to 12 months, you'll have a lot more to tell us.
Well, there's an explosion of research, and I think in the next year we can have something more meaningful in reports.
We will bring Dr. Phillips back. Thank you for being with us this evening.
All right, thanks so much, Greg. I appreciate it.